Looking to build your team's capability in service design, research, or human-centered design or service design and AI courses? This is HCD offers practical, hands-on training for organizations, tailored to your context, not off the shelf. Teams at Verizon, AIB, Flutter, AccentureSong, Gusto, local government, government departments, and NGOs across Europe have all leveled up through these programs. To explore what's possible for your team, book a free 15-minute call. See the link in the show notes to find out more. Now let's get back to that episode.
Hey folks, and welcome back to another episode of This is HCD. My name is Gerry Scullion and I'm a human-centered service design practitioner based in the beautiful city of Dublin, Ireland. Today in the show, I'm delighted to welcome co-founder Ben Reason of Livework, one of the longest, if not the longest, service design agencies in the world. Ben is one of those people that I learned from way back in the day when the first seminal books of service design were published in the early 2010s, I believe. Now, in this conversation, we spoke about a case study that Ben mentioned to me in passing about the British Parliament and how journey architecture, service architecture, journey management, call it what you want. They don't call it that. British government, though, we uncover that in this episode. Now, if you imagine it's the year 2001 and three designers got together over a weekend and decided that they were going to start a company doing something that the world didn't really have a name for yet. That is how Livework was born. We covered that in another episode with Ben a couple of years ago. But in this episode, myself and Ben trace that arc from the early days of really designing websites way back in those points where, from my own experience, where they were designing experiences and services for connected cars like Fiat and mobile services for Orange, to today's reality, where we're at right now, organizations adopting journey management as an operating model, sometimes without ever even calling it that. Now, the conversational centerpiece for this conversation is really about the UK Parliament. A transformation that took 3 years instead of 5. That's because they're so good at doing this stuff. And where service design got rebadged as value streams and embedded inside the COO's operating model. Ben argues this kind of quiet translation isn't a compromise, it's actually how the work actually lands. We get into the politics. I ask all of the nuances, some questions that I wanted to know the answers to, like how do you price this stuff? And where service and why service design is countercultural by definition. We really get into the whole kind of design punk stuff. If you're following me on LinkedIn or reading my newsletter on thisishcd.com, I started talking a lot more around what it means to be design punk. I believe we're right at that moment. Right now, I see a lot of parallels between 2001 and where we're at right now, where AI is really disrupting things. The web and digital was doing exactly the same thing in 2001, and Ben gives his thoughts on that. It's a fantastic conversation. I know you're going to enjoy it because Ben is amazing. And remember, if you're listening to this episode and you want to know a little bit more around journey management, there's a free course that myself and Mark Stickdorn created on thisishcd.com. You can just go to it, sign up with your email address and take the course. It's fantastic. I know you're going to love this one, so let's jump straight in. Ben, we are recording. Delighted to have you back on the podcast. I actually don't know when the last time we've spoken on the podcast. I think it might have been during the pandemic. But great to have you back on the show. But for anyone who has lived under a rock and who is into service design and may not recognize the name Ben Reason, maybe give us a little bit of an introduction of who you are and what you do.
Hi, Gerry. Yeah, I think it's a decent gap between the last time, respectable length of time to have me back on. So hi, everybody. I'm Ben. I'm one of the founders of Livework, and we kind of modestly claim to be the first service design company, the first company that kind of went out in the world and said, service design is a thing, it's what we do, back in 2001. So I'm the last one standing of the three founders.
You haven't killed them, just to be clear.
No. They managed to move on to new things. I'm still treading the same path.
I mean, Livework has been around for, that's 25 years. it's a pretty epic story. And like, I mean, someday someone's going to buy the Netflix rights to that story, I'm sure, of the early days. Yeah. But we want to speak a little bit more today around, well, I'd like to talk a bit more around the journey of service design from the early days to where we're at now, because I believe we're at a really interesting point. I know, speaking from personal experience and professional experience, where service design is at and journey management and stuff. We're going to get into that in a little bit. But tell me a little bit about the origins of Livework and what service design was like, and what kind of problems organizations had in those days that you might have been presented with, trying to help them solve.
So the origin myth that we have was that the three of us, so Lavrans, Chris and myself, we were all working for other agencies and a bit kind of fed up with working for somebody else. So and also wanted to, kind of came together with the idea of starting a design studio. So, we were working for digital shops, where marketing or technology might be in the lead, and we were like, let's do some design-led stuff. And we got together for a weekend. Those guys were both product/industrial design,
same as me, industrial
graduates, and they'd been at the Royal College on a master's together, where they'd kind of, I think, written something about like the product is dead, long live the service. So they realized that they were working in the service industries, even if they'd been trained for sort of manufacturing.
Yeah.
At the same time, I'd been on a master's and I'd read a book called Natural Capitalism, which has a whole chapter on services as a sort of driver of efficiency and particularly around like ecological, like reducing waste. So we'd all been like into the whole service, thinking about services, realizing that. Yeah. And we just sort of said over a weekend, maybe we're a service design company. And then we went out and looked around to see whether that was a thing. And we found Lynn Shostak, who's the kind of a touchstone in service design as the kind of originator of blueprints. We found Birgit Marga teaching service design in Cologne. We knew IDEO, and they'd done some work for Amtrak around, like multi-channel, multi-touch point kind of brand-driven design work. So that was our mission, was to do that, make that a thing. And we did say, if it's going to be a thing, we probably need competition. We need other people doing it. Otherwise, we're just standalone.
Yeah.
At some point, you'll need to be able to study it, and it needs a language. It needs a kind of culture around it. So that was our starting up. And then you asked like what kind of challenges. So that was 2001. So the internet was still basically the work that we did that was really good and fun was helping firms think about how the internet would change services or enable them to provide services that they hadn't done before. So it was a really good time because the work was kind of innovation, new services. We worked with Fiat looking at car sharing. We worked with Orange just on a whole load of like, what can you do with mobile telephones? We worked with Experian, who are this dry business innovation company, but we helped to kind of put a whole load of, we were in a meeting with them and I think Chris said something like, well, we don't do B2B, and we were all kicking him under the table saying, we do now. So, so that was the first phase was a really good fun time of, I guess being the kids in the room who understood the new technology and could help.
Yeah. Just to give people a context. So at that time, apps weren't a thing. Mobile phones, smartphones weren't even around. You're 5 years away from kind of the iPhone dropping at that point as well. Were businesses still kind of talking about like digital just as a thing? Like, I know it's very hard to reflect back to that kind of period of time. And the reason why I'm asking that is because it was around that time I graduated, and I know people were like, can you do websites? What'll a website be able to do? Like, and people were replicating brochures, and they're just like kind of putting it online. The step from that to what you're talking about doing must have been huge. how did you circumnavigate that kind of conversation to get them to, one, think beyond digital, and then think beyond in terms of a service?
It's a nice question, Gerry. So if I backtrack my career, it's been sort of the late 90s. I was working for places that were kind of, early digital shops, and making stupid websites like brochureware, making websites.
Yeah.
We made
CD-ROMs or stuff, was it?
Yeah, we made websites for like booze brands that were kind of like clickable adverts and things. And that was kind of, so that was a bit too early. And that early, from 2001, the timing was very nice in that some of these, I mentioned Orange, we worked for Sony and Sony Ericsson as well.
Nice.
All these places had these kind of were popping up these little innovations. So the internet had become mature enough that it wasn't like, we used to have to tell people that they should put a URL on a billboard or something, like the internet is part of your media. But this was a time when it was just popping up. So we had all these early adopter clients, so with Fiat, we were working with the advanced concept design team who would make concept cars. So we were like, okay, what's a connected car? What can that do? So it was like, I was just thinking, you could say it was like, how now with AI and everybody is like, we have to do something with this. It was that kind of a moment where you're not having to push too hard, but and in a way, if you kind of plugged into it, it was a very easy time to. There were lots of gaps, right? Lots of opportunities to do interesting things.
Yeah, no, I'm seeing the parallels between right back then with the kind of the web emerging and where we're at now with AI, and then the design discipline, if you want, kind of thinking about like what's our future like and how can we provide value back to those businesses. Yeah. I can see that strand of value giving between, where you were at in 2001, being able to sell that. And one of the things, and I don't like selling too much, but really demonstrating the value of it. And it wasn't until maybe 2018 when I caught up with Mark Stickthorne about journey management, and he was talking about the interconnectedness of all the layers and things like this, and where we're at now with journey management. And he's got Smaply, and there's lots of other competitors in this space as well. One of the challenges that I have as a practitioner is we can talk about the theory and how this all makes sense about how you've got your parent journey and you've got your sub journeys, and wouldn't it be great, to quote the Beach Boys, if we were able to look at all of these pain points and opportunities and quantify them at the ecosystem level, and then maybe even beyond sometimes the ecosystem level, and at those different levels of Zoom, and people are all nodding along, and then we're kind of searching a little bit more for how do you go about doing that, and are there case studies out there which help bring that conversation to life so we can point at others. And I'm very excited to say I've got a couple, but you definitely have one that I want to speak a little bit more about. Tell me the project and how it came about from your world.
Can I just make a link through to the previous thing? So I've sort of seen service design was very much in its early years focused on that insight into kind of users and customers and what's their experience with that interaction. And then we had that nice period of doing innovation work. And then we hit a certain point where the design is only going to be effective, or will be more effective more often, if we can interface with the organization. So I've started to see journey management is like service design into an organization, like how would you present it to an organization as a capability that is valuable to them? And then to link to your point, you're right. The promise is wonderful, and you can. We just had a chat with a whole load of journey management people yesterday, and they got into this whole discussion of level 1, level 2, level 3, and like how far do you go, and all of these kind of things. So to answer your question,
good conversations to have.
So back in 2000, we got the chance to work with with the UK Parliament. So
Wow.
it's an interesting case because the customers are quite interesting people in that they're.
You said 2000 there. Is that 2020, you mean?
Sorry, 2020. Yeah, back in 2020.
Yeah. Right, good.
So Parliament obviously has a kind of a back office where all the MPs and lords and ladies get supported with basic services like providing them with laptops and connectivity, and then the kind of the more esoteric services that are around the parliamentary record, the library, these kind of ancient things that have existed there in paper form for ages and evolved, the facilitation of committees and these kind of things. And they basically had a big problem in that organization. We were hired by the CTO, so was suffering from significant technical debt, but more from a kind of customer point of view, and particularly the key customer for this support organization is like the clerk of the commons, so the administrative civil servant who is responsible for the running of Parliament, and they were not able to control what was being done, what technology was being built, what the priorities were. And because you're in a very political environment, lots of people shouting about what they need, and that being the most important. And a little digging showed that they had a backlog that was, for the year, that was 5 times the capability that they had. So there's no kind of truth and honesty about what was possible. What was being promised was actually way off the charts of what was achievable. To cut to the end point, they are now using a journey, I guess, a service operating model. So they know what services they provide, and then they're managing them by understanding what journeys those services are made up of. And they've changed the names. They don't call it journey management. They don't call it service design, because this is all running within the COO down. So it's the operational model that they're using. This is why it's a super case study for us, because it's like, okay, they've adopted this as an operating model. I just want to pause there. And this work was all led by one of my colleagues, Liz LeBlanc. So I want to give her like huge credit for this. She's moved on from Livework. And
big shout out to Liz.
Yeah, the team that worked on it. So I was there at the beginning and kind of kept involved, but Liz drove this.
Okay.
So for me, it's like it's one of the best examples of how that promise of this could be the way that you organize around services and customers, and then you plug that into how do you actually govern your change program.
Nice.
And just to give the final trumpet blow. So they thought this was a 5-year transformation program. And we ended up running it in 3 years and then setting them up for constant, ongoing improvement. So reduce that change period. And
very nice.
Yeah.
Can I take a step back? One of the first steps is being able to identify that you are actually delivering services and what those services are.
Yeah.
And that's the whole, to me, that's the emergence. Once you see that happening, you're like, okay, actually now they're starting to refer to the collection of those activities as one service. Okay. So like I'm watching and listening for those in the calls. How did you do it? I'd love to know. I can talk about how I do it, but no one's interested in me. You're the guest here, So how did you guys go about doing that?
I'm gonna. The simple answer is we did that because that's what we do. I mean, like we went out and identified which customer groups they have. So they have, the MPs and their staff, and then they have the public who come and visit Parliament, and they have the press. And then we said, what services do you provide to these groups? And we said, this is what you do. And they said, oh my God, that's provided a level of clarity that we have never had. So that's the short story. To get to that, we did a kind of corporate therapy slash internal insight piece of work where we understood all the things that were causing them pain. So again, Liz created these 7 vicious cycles that were going on. So they were project oriented. So they were just they were just running projects and 6 other things. So there was a process of sort of understanding and being clear that the problem was quite significant and systemic.
Yeah.
But to your point, and I think I just want to say that's a fantastic first question, Gerry, because if that realization isn't there, if that we provide services, I've got a friend Tom who works at JP Morgan, and he's like, if they don't understand that they're providing services, then like we can't. Moving on is probably going too fast, right? If you haven't understood that, and you're providing services, and that is how you manage value, right? I sometimes think, if you think about services in really simple senses, you have a product. Let's say you have a bank account, for Tom's sake, but how do people get to that bank account, use it well, and move on? That's the service, right? And if that stuff doesn't exist, you just have a bank account sitting there as a kind of empty thing.
Dormant.
They're all providing services, but if they don't realize it, then there's a kind of a whole load of dark matter, surrounding.
I love that. Yeah. And it's a really good point. Like, I've used similar things like top tasks is one, Gerry McGovern's framework, to help whittle it down and really refine at the language level. Like, what are you calling this? And what makes sense, and you get that opportunity to kind of like, hit twice. You're saying, well, actually, this is the language of the people. That's funny. When I was up in Belfast City, and they're going on their journey at the moment, and myself and yourself have just rekindled a new part of our friendship of music. I think this stuff is like punk. I think this is the punk moment of service design. You can coin that, nick it, because being able to really identify that language and bringing it back to the organization and defining this is what a service is. And it is so punk. It is like, we're going back to the grassroots of what service design can give an organization. So it's an important factor, and I'm glad that we've called that point out, because trying to sell something like journey management to an organization that still doesn't really understand that, it's kind of you're wasting your time a lot of the time.
So when you say punk, and so you're saying service design is at the kind of the punk stage.
I think there's a punk stage happening at the moment. Well, it is, because I'm doing a lot of the kind of the grunt work of getting organizations in the public space to think about services and really reframe the services. And I'm into the punk stuff, and I like, it's a nice quote as well.
I guess so. Punk as a reaction to the kind of the hippie,
yes,
the hippie Nirvana ideology, and saying, hang on a minute, let's just get down and dirty and make stuff with what we've got.
I want you to audition as being Sid Vicious for my band. Okay, right? This is what I'm bringing you up here, and I'm holding you accountable on This Is HCD to talk about it. But I think it is really going back to the grassroots, and really kind of talking about what matters here and bringing it back. And I can see, because when I quoted that the other day in Belfast, there were people on LinkedIn talking about saying we are doing punk. And I go, it is kind of punk in some ways to fight against a lot of the other noise that's going on in the industry at the moment, like the attraction of going headlong into AI and talking about this stuff. Yet we're not really focusing on what matters. Yeah. I'm like, get that stuff right first before we can start getting into AI conversations.
I've been so that when you get designers who get frustrated with
design,
whether they're being listened, like why don't they get this? Why don't they understand that there's logic? Like I agree with them. The service design logic is sound, but organizations don't see it. And, they sort of say, well, look, it's what we're doing is countercultural. Like all the stuff that they've done in order to put the silos in place to divide these things up, to be focused on we're asking them, we're cutting across all that, and that's the punk thing, right? You're saying, yeah, kind of put aside all of your complexity and your vested stuff, and let's just
refocus.
Yeah.
It's also like, just to be a little bit of a caveat, I'm not talking about anarchy. Okay, right. But going back to that, so we're talking about the Parliament project. What do they refer to it as now? You said an operational model, is that it?
Yeah, and they talk about value streams.
Value streams, okay. Where we could go through the whole kind of, and then we did a journey on level 1 and level 2. But what does it look like now in terms of the hierarchical structure? Because the challenge there, when you start thinking about a service, it tends to cut across that hierarchy. And the problem there that a lot of organizations fit, we're actually going to have to collaborate an awful lot more. There's more passing the batons, if you want, between those hierarchical verticals in a typical structure. What does it look like now from their perspectives? Because I know there's other case studies happening in banks in London at the moment where they're shifting.
Yeah.
I'd love to understand a little bit more of that journey that went on. And how you managed those kind of the kind of collaboration points between teams and.
I think one of the reasons this is a successful story is the size of the organization. So Parliament is not a huge organization. There's a few hundred people who work inside.
Wow. Okay.
So you're able to, I guess most of the journeys that they're looking at are significant ones.
Yeah.
And they're not.
Can you give me an example of some of those journeys and services?
Yeah, I mean the ones that we worked on as the kind of, the first, you pick your first ones that are high impact and going to make a difference. So they're really plonky. So one is around customer support. Someone phones up with any kind of technical problem. I mean, they're end user compute in the jargon.
How did you derive those priority 1s and priority 2s?
Through volume of usage and complaints data, and really simple things like where are your users experiencing the most pain, and where are you experiencing the most failure cost, and it's quite simple. The other thing with Parliament is everybody changes jobs at the same time, so onboarding is quite an interesting journey because it's like they all start on the same.
I don't believe you.
Well, you have an election. And
of course,
you have a whole new intake of people. The other interesting thing about this project is it happened during COVID. So the digital and IT support became more important. There was a little anecdote about, suddenly, folks outside of England might not know, but the House of Lords is full of old people who have been granted a lordship because they did some public service or inherited it. They all suddenly had to be able to do their duties digitally, and the CTO called.
How did that happen? Like, how did that evolve? Because
suddenly they had to ship out a whole load of laptops and try and get people connected and online. And we had a call from the CTO who said, "I've got this problem with Dame so and so. She can't. I need to help her open her laptop so that we can tell her how to use her laptop." And it was like a kind of.
That's so like. People at that sort of level, they obviously have probably assistants and stuff to do a lot of this stuff for them.
But it was COVID. Everything.
So they didn't even have them there. So there was just.
Well, we did say to him, sorry, we can't help you with this particular.
You're on your own. Yeah, that's an interesting anecdote.
But back to your point, because you mentioned one of the banks, and on this chat we had the other week, we actually had probably that bank represented on the call, and we had a really good chat about scale of organization. So I think, I have reflected a lot of my kind of favorite engagements and stories have come from this, not the biggest companies in the world, there is an interesting thing around service design, journey management, and scale. And when you get I wonder whether it's exponential. So we worked with JP Morgan for a while, who are the biggest, bank in the world. And who's just got so many stakeholders. You think you get into that whole journey logic of, well, we can all align around this journey, but the number of people who are aligning and the interests that go into that just, it's
extortionate.
It's maybe not maybe not impossible, but it's a different level of commitment that they would have to make versus, we've got some nice stories of firms where the chief exec has got the kind of, the journey architecture, as we call it, the full customer relationship as a sort of laminated thing in his briefcase. But they're generally mid-sized companies.
Yeah. Can I go back to why did they reach out to you in the first place?
Somebody.
So there's usually one smart person in the organization who's heard about something.
Yeah, we have a kind of sense that it's a little bit of a frustration in a way. I don't know if we're responsible, because I said early on, we're working for all these early adopters. It still feels like we're working with early adopters, people who want to make a difference to their organizations. They've generally had some interaction with design, and they understand those kind of first principles around collaboration and engagement with customers and creativity. So someone like that. We need someone like that on the inside.
Was this their first kind of foray into service design within Parliament?
No, they had. So Parliament is, you'll be aware of in the UK we have government digital services. So there are service designers within government departments. They were always at pains to say Parliament is not government. Parliament is where the government is the administration, and Parliament is the legislature. But they were close to GDS, and there were a couple of service designers within Parliament when we arrived.
Okay, that's interesting. So you've had those early conversations, and one of the questions that I'd like to kind of ask, and you might say, Gerry, too much. When it comes to the business dealing of, telling them about this and exploring it, how did you cut that deal up over the course of the 4 years?
Yeah.
Because that's a big thing in my experience of saying, look, this is what the vision is, but how do we slice this up?
Yeah. A simple answer is, I think there was a short, I think we called it
discovery.
I would always say it was a sort of strategic piece. It's like the vision. Yeah. So we did the short piece included that sort of vicious cycle, like what is the problem, and it was a vision for how Parliament could be, and that revolved around it. In some ways, this is a sort of fancy employee experience project. It's like, what is it like to work here? They did have issues around, just the frustration of being somewhere where, the working environment is a little bit broken and dated. So that the vision was around that, 21st century workplace, all that kind of stuff. And then the second piece was putting a structure and a plan together for the transformation piece. So, it's like, okay, we need writing a business case with the CTO, defining the approach. How are we going to actually undertake this? The transformation. And then after that, once that was funded, I think it was cut down into slices.
Sure.
There were like annual kind of contracts for us.
Yeah. So at that handoff point, you mentioned there that they renamed it, and they called it something else, obviously. But walk me through. You finished it it was a 5-year, and you finished in 3 years. Yeah. And the last 2 years were really around embedding it. Walk me through the adoption and the training pieces that go around this, because people are going to go, oh yeah, we kind of understand. It's just a software, we're using Snappy or whatever it is.
Right.
Oh yeah, that's cool. I don't need to do anything else, and I go back to my day job, and then I also have to do a little bit of service design for 20 minutes a day.
Yeah.
That piece, what does it look like? Did you make service designers out of coal, or what happened there?
a kind of classic, do the first one together, do the second one supporting. And this is where we get into sort of things that are fairly well discussed in journey management. So, having journey owners, and in this case, all of these people, in terms of journey ownership, were operations people. So it was people who were quite close to the particular journey, from a operational responsibility, and then the designers in the place, and they did bring more in, are there as kind of experts to support activities in there. So we now, I can't remember exactly what we deployed, but we have a kind of a starter model for putting a team around journey management in terms of ownership, stakeholder, contributors, and how you plan that in and how you ladder that up. So, if you think of a level 0, the ownership of that is at a executive level. That's about the prioritization, that level, and then you come down to a more of a management level, all that kind of stuff. So a version of that fit their operations.
Can I ask? It seems like a sort of a meaningless question, but the titles that people give to their roles, was there conversations around there of service owner? Or did you have product management or project management, or did you just keep the same language, but we just provided that person who will be a service owner with the capabilities and the training?
I have to say, Gerry, I don't have the specifics for that.
On that. That's okay. Like, it's the reason where that comes from is when you look at some of the local government work, or even government work that I've done, often what I found is whenever service design agencies or practices go in, the question comes around is like, are you going to make more service designers in there? Are people going to change their title to becoming a service designer? And I mean, it begs the question is like, what is the outcome we're trying to achieve here? We're not trying to touch people and kind of go, you have now been, anointed a service designer. It's not really about that for me. It's really about like making people work better. And the training, but I just wanted to see if there was any of those kind of conversations that might have been had at a strategic level.
Yeah. Fairly keen on. Generally, I think there is ownership of these things, and what you're saying, what I hope we're doing is kind of equipping an operational person with a new way of kind of getting a handle on what they're responsible for. And then service design comes in as a capability. This is something else we discussed in a way. It's like, when lots of people have service design teams in-house, but they're of limited size and capability. So sort of seems to be what works a lot of times is you use that prioritization to say, okay, I'm going to deploy my service design team for these things. And then I'm going to, we're going to provide the journey logic to ops teams to use to their best capability in the day-to-day. And then, they can kind of internally hire the service designers when it requires the lifting. I've got a nice little related topic though, because we've been doing quite a lot of work in the NHS, and the client we had there, who was a CTO as well, he identified that in the NHS they have a role which is like a quality lead, which is about quality in healthcare is this complex thing around clinical but also process quality, and he found that those people were very good to kind of be hybrid service designers, so fitting it in with, I guess, what the standards of the organization are, what's really embedded in terms of standards is an interesting thought.
Yeah, no, it's a conversation that I think more and more people are having as they adopt this. Like, what does it look like, the operational model that sits around it? So you're seeing it more like a center of excellence within service design within the organization, that like a hub and spoke kind of model that goes out and
I think
delivers.
I'm sort of thinking about there's a separation of service design as a, or journey management as part of that as a organizational thing that people understand and are involved in, and then the service designer as someone who's actually got the specific toolkit and skill set to to do those core things that service designers do. And I think asking people who haven't been trained to do like really high quality research work or concept development, or is pushing it too hard. Like, let's provide them with that kind of, like, let's almost say design school skill set and value that, right? That's not something that anybody can do. But they can all be involved in the service design activity, which is clearly a collective thing. And back to your early point, requires them all to understand they're involved in the service.
100%.
Yeah.
What does it look like, Ben, in the future? Like, as governments, and I want you to paint the picture. I'm giving you the brush here. You got any color of paint that you want to use on this canvas. But what does it look like if government and governments adopted journey management? What kind of future would that give for service designers working in the organization, do you think?
Right. Can I reframe it a little bit?
Yeah, go ahead, reframe it.
So I think, what does it look like if governments really understood that the service that they're providing, how would that stop them being so stupid about the way they go about policy?
Exactly. I mean, that's the trajectory of the question.
And then how does that kind of manifest at the next level? So to illustrate, again, in England last year, we had the government tried to change the way the benefit system works, trying to reduce the cost of disability benefits. And then it all got thrown out in Parliament by politicians, because there was this kind of national outcry. And I did write a piece just saying, look, would it have made a difference, a sort of counterfactual, had this been done in a design, this is a service we provide to support people, but actually, it's a wider service about helping people live well, which might mean finding the right kind of work for them.
Yeah.
If this kind of policy was designed, we might then come up with a proposal that people have been involved in, understand. There's been a public discussion about it. We're able to tell stories about what we're trying to achieve for people and how we're going to get there, rather than just shut off benefits and things like that. I believe that would be more likely to be successful.
Yeah, I know. I mean, going back to the punk piece, like, if you imagine that this hyper transparent operational piece within government existed.
Yeah.
I mean, this is where, we start moving into the world of, like, being able to apply more equitable services and inclusive services. And it just provides the scaffolding for the real work.
Yeah. And then
the next 25 years of work.
That's the real work. And then if you connect it to journey, so let's say you have somebody who, has suffered some kind of disability, or temporary or otherwise. What's the journey they go on with government to get them to and what's the outcome that we're collectively pursuing? So you start at that kind of story level, and then you move through it.
I mean, this is why I keep on coming back to that punk statement.
Yeah.
It just feels we're at this point, and this is why, like, I'm still kind of like doing this podcast. It feels like there's a real momentum happening here. And for anyone who's listening to this episode and they're like, what the is journey management? Okay, like, if you go to thisishcd.com, by the way, there's a free course that myself and Mark, and who knows, maybe Ben might make an appearance in the next version of that. Like, if I can wrangle him into it, I'll do it after this call. You can take a free course on Introduction to Journey Management. Just go on there. All you have to do is put your email in. That's all we're asking. You go onto the platform and you watch myself and Mark talk about how to set up the foundations for a journey management system in your organization. Ben, you've also written isn't there a white paper that we discussed? There was something else around sustainability.
Well, so the Livework team, actually the Brazil team, have a white paper on journey management, which if you're happy to.
Yeah, absolutely, Ben. Yeah. If I'm happy to completely,
Yeah.
Is that downloadable on the Livework website?
I don't know.
I don't know yet. Well, what I'll do is I'll discuss it with Ben off camera. Yeah. We'll work out the logistics, and I'll put a link in the show notes for people to access that. Yeah. Now, look, folks, we're coming towards this episode, the end of this episode, Ben, and I wanted to, first of all, thank you, because I know you're coming on here. We don't script these conversations. We roughly do bullet points of what we want to cover off. But if you want to follow Ben and Ben's journey and Livework, go ahead on, into LinkedIn, connect with Ben. If you want to have strategic conversations about what this looks like in your organization, you can't look further than Livework and Ben Reason and the team over there. I look to them. I do similar work, and I look to these guys as being the pioneers. So it's fantastic to have you on the episode talking about this. And if people want to reach out and have those conversations, is LinkedIn one of your preferred channels?
LinkedIn is fun, or the website? That's good. Yeah.
Is it? Yeah. LinkedIn, you're still big on, because we obviously don't like that one here.
No.
We don't promote. I'm doing X with my arms here if you're watching it. But we'll send people to you on your LinkedIn, and maybe can we put your email address in the show notes as well if people want to reach out and ask questions, because I still think email is king, Anything else you wanted to give a shout out to before we wrap it up, Ben?
No, I'm just motivated to say anarchy in the UK, Gerry, as a sign off.
I can see this one taking off, and we're going to be talking about punk, and who knows, maybe we'll get some AI generation.
If anyone is triggered by intrigued, let's say, by the punk thing, I wrote a kind of post called Gonzo Service Design, which I think is in the same spirit. So
yeah, no, absolutely. Is that on LinkedIn?
That's on Medium or somewhere on the internet. Somewhere like
okay, well, I'll try and get a link for that. I'll put it into the show notes as well. But absolutely, Ben, look, thanks so much for your time. I know you're a busy person, so I really appreciate you coming on here and sharing your information. And thanks for sharing the case study as well. It's very, 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 very valuable for everyone who's listening to the podcast. So I appreciate it.
You're very welcome. Thank you for having me, Gerry. It's been fun.